Hey everybody, it's Tom, and I'm coming to you today with the 8th of our efforts to begin approaching the definition of certain terms which are crucial, really, to our public conversation, but despite that are often left only vaguely defined, if defined at all. And today the word in question is going to be, the state. Or rather, it's a couplet, again, sort of as in the gender-sex video, where these two notions are so tightly enmeshed that you really cannot speak of one without the other. So the state-government dyad, if you like. Oftentimes, the words state and government is these two terms are used interchangeably, which is, while understandable, ultimately lamentable, because they are zeroing in upon two different scopes, one of which much narrower than the other. The state, and as I was thinking about this, it really struck me how it's such an almost elusive thing. The state is an enfolding concept which draws into it sort of disparate phenomena, such as a population of people, a physical territory, a certain set of laws and orders, the government, right? All these are things which are enfolded within the state, but which yet stand distinct from it. The thing which perhaps enables the state to embrace all these disparate phenomenon is a particular vision or project that constitutes or grounds a society, a group of people that are relating or normatively to relate to each other after a particular manner that is embodied in the emergence of the state. This is one way of putting it. I'd say it's a very problematic way of dealing with human reality and human relationship. In fact, I might even go so far as to suggest that when we attach ourselves to the idea of the state as having, or as needing to have weight in how we relate with each other, we are really undercutting our ability to cultivate a free and embracing society. It sort of operates, I think, after a fashion similar to an ideology. As I sort of hinted at this distinction when I was talking about religion, and maybe I mentioned this distinction also in reference to the question of state, where you try and impose a particular vision on reality and are willing to sacrifice reality itself to instantiate that vision, to bring it into effect. When we become attached to the idea that we should organize along state lines, then we lose contact with the reality that we as human beings exist in a global society. Now, one has to be very careful how you then enunciate how that global society itself is organized and ramifies and all the rest of it. But leaving that to the side for the moment, we can turn to the issue of the government. What is the government? Well, the government can be said to be the bureaucratic apparatus, the set of people, rules, and structures that implement the will of the state through the consummation of certain laws and practices, and the use of them, as the common phrase goes, its monopoly on force, right? consummate isn't quite the right word. It ratifies, I could say, it ratifies, if you like, the legitimacy of certain decisions and policies and courses of action by grounding those decisions, policies, and courses of action through the use of force. That force being manifested in the police and the military. It does this both within its so-called boundaries and without, that distinction being domestic versus foreign. So, even though it's intimately related with the state, it is not identical with it. It simply pretends or claims that it can use this concept of the state to justify its actions. You see, what we have to remark here is that we are, I think Alfred North Whitehead had put it like this, he called it the fallacy of misplaced concreteness. We're talking about things as if they have a singular, monolithic, or coherent reality to them, like the state or the government, as if they were a single actor, a single kind of subjectivity with a particular definite will that it then executes, on the analogy that they are, if you like, persons, or that the state is a person and the government is the agent who implements the will of this person. That's actually basically how it's set up in social contract theory, and people like Rousseau, who, I actually have a video about him. I'm going to put a link there, in his social contract notion. But what's going on in the real world? You don't actually have these monoliths. You don't have a state, right? The state is heterogeneous. There's lots of people inside of it that are acting, some of them in utter indifference to the state, or in the project of the state, some of them in opposition to it, some of it in full-throated support. And even within these subgroups, there's enormous disparities. And within the government, similarly, there is a great plurality of things going on there. So when we fixate and use these notions like the government or the state, we really have to keep our eyes open as to the enormous difference between the impression which that use of language can create as to a singular or monolithic phenomenon, and the reality of the actual events and happenings and people and actors in the world as heterogeneous and oftentimes frankly incoherent. This isn't to deny, however, that that is altogether the case. There is, in fact, many times under the umbrella of a state project or a government project, a definite set of principles which are inspiring and creating some coordination. The other upshot, by the way, I think, of indulging the idea of the state or the class as a monolith, as sort of imposing a certain kind of unity on a whole array of people, is it can actually at times obscure underlying differentiations, such as the problem of class. If we all think of ourselves as, oh, we're all American, that can conceal the fact that within the American fabric there's enormous class differentiation. There's class conflict. Likewise, similar tensions around race, around ethnicity, around gender, and even around what it means to be an American, you know, if you happen to be American. But the same thing goes, what does it mean to be French, English, Chinese, Indian? And is it even legitimate in some cases to recognize this as a way to ground one's identity? What about new states? What about states that no longer exist? You know, whatever happened to Prussia, okay? Whatever happened to the Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, okay? So when we look more closely at the concept of the state and the subordinate notion of the government, we're looking at framings of our human situation that I suspect deserve more robust interrogation than they have received. They're often accepted as simply obvious and matter-of-fact aspects or dimensions of how human society operates. I don't think that's the case at all. And I also don't think it's the case that they're necessarily positive fixtures or elements of human society. It seems rather to you closer to the facts of the matter, whatever they may be, to suggest that the state and the government are fundamentally forms which have embedded domination and coercion by a small segment of society over the rest of it. And it's certainly this arrangement has been less than, in my view, salutary with respect to what happens on the so-called international stage, where the concept of the state in one form or the other is generally invoked to justify the barbarous practice of warfare. So, so much then by way of like an initial approach to the question. What is a state? Again, an unfolding notion which organizes disparate phenomenon, often using terms like a physical territory, a particular population, and so forth, as being grounded in a project or a vision of how people should be, a culture of how an organized should be arrayed. The government is a more specific concept of a group of people within this broader complex that are involved in the enforcement of that vision vis-a-vis the project of law and order. And this is attained through the police and the military as enactors of the state's monopoly on so-called legitimate force. So, these are really actually very obviously freighted questions. There's a lot of emotionality that attaches to what arises in our engagement of these matters. And as a result, I guess as a coda, I should note that it takes a lot of discipline to enter into these kinds of conversations and not lose oneself. I see this in my person. Even in the course of these last few minutes remarking, I'm becoming sort of like excited and tempted to a certain intensity of response when I consider how ways in which the notions of state and government have been used both historically and presently have interfered with us getting on as people after a manner which reflects our potential to relate with each other in a loving and open way all the way across the spectrum. But that doesn't. But to indulge that kind of emotionality is oftentimes unhelpful. But it has to be acknowledged. It has to be acknowledged so that as part of what it is with which we're dealing, in order not to allow it to exercise an undue or hidden or subterranean influence on the course of that conversation. So there you have it. That's my effort at beginning to approach the questions of state and government. Again, like in the religion video, there's a certain almost displeasing generality, but I do think that's almost unavoidable, if not outrightly unavoidable, if we're going to acquire the necessary distance from the events, the challenges, questions that face us to navigate those events, those questions, those issues, those challenges that face us effectively. All right, well, anyway, thank you for listening. And tomorrow, sequel video It's the question of what does it mean to be politically to the left or politically to the right? Because you have that notion, the left-right divide, but a lot of times I think the way it is sketched doesn't follow from what it means in a deeper or more philosophical way to situate yourself at one point or another in that spectrum. This has been Tom. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow.